Hi, and welcome back. In the last section, we discussed networking on AWS, which laid the foundation for being able to create our own VPCs. We discussed IP addressing, subnets, and route tables. In this section, we will learn several methods to build, secure, and connect to a VPC. First, we are going to look at EC2 classics, which are instances that are launched outside of a VPC. Then we'll talk about the VPC that AWS already creates for you, the default VPC. Next, we'll demonstrate creating a VPC using the VPC wizard and then creating one from scratch. Next, we'll talk about several ways to connect to the instances in your VPC. And then we'll make your VPCs more secure by introducing network access control lists and bastion instances. Finally, we'll discuss making your architectures highly available by leveraging multiple availability zones, load balancing, and auto-scaling. In the first video in this section, Getting Started with VPCs, we will begin with a little history lesson by talking about classic EC2s and comparing them with EC2s that are launched in a VPC. We'll also talk about how to cope with an environment with both classic and VPC EC2s. And we'll end this video with the easiest way to get started with VPCs, using the default VPC. EC2s were first introduced by AWS back in 2006. Back then, there was only one big public network in which to launch your instances. Every instance was automatically assigned a public and private IP address controlled by AWS. If you stopped your instance for any reason, AWS took back your IPs, and when you started it up again, you got new ones. Since every instance had a public IP address, they were all essentially public. So you had to rely on security groups to restrict access to your databases and other instances that you wanted to keep private. And the security groups only allowed you to specify inbound rules. All outbound traffic was always allowed. In 2009, AWS launched VPCs and encouraged customers to launch instances in these virtual private networks, instead of in the big public network. EC2s that are not launched in a VPC are today called classic EC2s. This includes RDS instances which also had to be launched in the public network. In 2013, AWS declared that all accounts created after December 4, 2013 would have to launch their instances in VPCs. However, AWS accounts created before that date are grandfathered and can still today launch classic EC2 and RDS instances. If you or one of your customers have one of these older AWS accounts, migrating the classic instances to a VPC is highly recommended. Some of the advantages are the ability to specify your own private IP address ranges and keep the private IPs associated when you stop and start your instances. You can choose not to get a public IP address and also put your instance in a private subnet with no route to the internet. This is a powerful extra layer of security in addition to security groups. Security groups in a VPC allow you to create rules for outbound as well as inbound traffic. And by dividing your VPC into subnets, you can control traffic in and out of your subnets with NACLs and custom route tables. Customers with older AWS accounts may end up at some point with a mixed environment, a combination of classic instances outside of VPC and newer instances inside VPCs. Fortunately, you can configure your VPC with something called Classic Link, which allows instances in a VPC to communicate with instances outside the VPC using their private IP addresses. When you enable Classic Link, a route will be added to the VPC route table to give access to the classic network. However, with all the benefits a VPC can provide, you should migrate those classic instances into a VPC. The steps to do this are, first, create a VPC. Second, define a VPC security group for your instance. The security groups for classic instances cannot be used inside a VPC, so you will have to create a new one, but you could use the same rules. Third, create an AMI from the instance. The easiest way to do this is in the Management Console. Go to the EC2 dashboard, click on the box next to your instance, then under the Actions menu, choose Image, and then Create Image. Give it a name, put a description, and then click on Create Image. You can click on Close and then click on AMIs in the navigation bar, and after a few minutes you will see your AMI. Finally, once the AMI is ready, you can just launch the instance and select your VPC. When you launch an instance, you will see that AWS has already created a default VPC for you. VPCs cannot span regions, so AWS creates a default VPC in each region. The default VPC will have a minimum of 2, but depending on the region could have up to 5 public subnets, 1 per availability zone. We'll discuss availability zones in a later section on high availability, but for now what you need to know is that AWS builds their data centers in small clusters known as availability zones, or AZs for short. Each AZ is separated by tens of miles, so if a natural or other disaster should strike, at most only one AZ should be affected. Every region has at least 2 availability zones, but the largest regions have up to 5. Subnets cannot span availability zones, so your default VPC will have a subnet in each AZ. These will be public subnets and have a size of /20. The VPC will have an internet gateway attached and a route in the route table to the internet through the gateway. As you can see, this is a very basic VPC and it doesn't provide private subnets. However, you can customize it and add those if you want. In this video, we discussed classic and VPC EC2 instances and how to cope with a mixed environment. We also described the default VPC, which, for simple public applications and proof of concepts, may be all that you need. However, it will require a lot of modifications to make it suitable for most production workloads and provide the needed security.